All right, good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the House and Labor Industry Committee to order. Jonathan, please take the roll.
Dawkins,
Here.
Boyd,
Here by designation.
Brennan, Deloso, Donahue, Giroll,
Here by designation.
Green, Haddock, McNeil, O'Mara, Piscitano, Rossi,
Here by designation.
Scott,
Here by designation.
Young, McKenzie,
Here.
Cooper, Diorsi, Ecker,
Here by designation.
Flood,
By designation.
Gleim,
Here.
Ham,
Here by designation.
Jones,
Here by designation.
Kiefer, Rowe,
Here.
Stanbaugh.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Today we have one item on the agenda, House Bill 2235, printers number 2989, sponsored by Representative Haddock. Green makes a motion to consider House Bill 2235. Is there a second? Second by Donahue. Thank you. Ryan, please explain the bill.
House Bill 2235, printers number 2989, the Meatpacking and Food Processing Protection Act, creates worker safety training requirements in the meatpacking and food processing industry, provides unpaid sick leave, establishes facility health and safety committees, requires the development of a model infectious disease exposure prevention plan, creates violations and imposes administrative penalties, and permits civil actions.
Thank you. I'll now like to recognize Representative Haddock for brief remarks on House Bill 2235.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My legislation, House Bill 2235, the Meatpacking and Food Processing Protection Act, will help protect essential workers in this vital but high-risk industry from illness and injury. Workers in the meatpacking and food processing industry frequently experience strains, chemical burns, exposures to hazardous chemicals, caught between falls, lacerations, cuts, and even amputations. According to the Federal Occupation Safety and Health Administration, 29 states covered by federal OSHA standards, 27 meatpacking workers per day suffer from amputation or other hospitalizations between 2015 and 2023. Many of these injuries are associated with improper training, communication, and overcrowding on lines, exhaustion, unsafe working conditions, and absence of protective equipment, and the underlying injury. Additionally, meatpacking and food processing plants became a hotspot for the outbreak during the COVID-19 pandemic. In for the first year of the pandemic, over 59,000 workers in the industry were affected with COVID, and 269 lost their lives. Working conditions in these facilities led to increased transmission rates. In counties with large beef and pork processing plants, infection rates were double the national average, with about 20% higher in counties with poultry processors. My legislation, House Bill 2235, seeks to improve the health and safety of the workers in the meatpacking and food processing industry by providing safety and training for new workers, supplying workplace policies and documents in languages that the workers read and speak if there's 5% of the population or more, creating workplace safety committees, and developing a model for infectious disease exposure prevention plan that can be easily adopted by the industry and the employers during the public health emergency. Importantly, my legislation carves out a small business exception that only applies to facilities with 100 and more workers. Rather than duplicating the federal OSHA and USDA standards, it simply requires more conversations and collaboration between the workers and the employers to improve the facility and the health and the safety. This bill does not require structural or material changes to the actual facility and does not apply to grocery stores and other retail food establishments. I'd like to note that this committee vote is the first step in the process, and I look forward to continuing to engage with all stakeholders as the bill moves through the House. Meat packing and food processing workers are the definition of essential workers. Without them, our grocery store shelves would be empty, and the Pennsylvania economy would certainly suffer. These workers deserve common sense protections to keep them safe at work, and I ask the members for an affirmative vote on House Bill 2235. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Minority Chairman McKenzie will be offering amendment A04152. Andrew, please explain the amendment.
Thank you. Amendment A04152 by Chairman McKenzie requires employers to provide information to employees about the State Child Labor Act and federal law prohibition on the employment of illegal aliens, and requires the Industry Workers' Rights Coordinator to report suspected employment of illegal aliens.
Thank you. Representative Kiefer offers offers to bring up the amendment A04152, and second by Representative Gleim. Is there any comments? I now turn to the Minority Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would help provide information, as we're seeing there, the underlying bill, requires information for new employees around training and orientation and things like that. We feel that this industry in particular, not singling out any particular business, but unfortunately, this industry has had a reported or a documented history of child labor violations, and especially with immigrant and undocumented children. And so by requiring this information to be provided to employees, I think this amendment will protect children from working in illegal and dangerous workplaces and protect unaccompanied minors from being exploited. If this bill is indeed about safety, it's imperative that we include these protections to react to the flood of unaccompanied minors being found in child labor violations, many in the meatpacking and food processing industries. According to recent reporting, in 2021 and 2022, the Biden administration released about 263,000 unaccompanied minors into the United States. And those are just the ones that the federal government is aware of. The U.S. Department of Labor has noted a 69% increase in the number of child labor violations since just 5 years ago. Unaccompanied minors, sometimes 12 or 13 years old, have been found cleaning slaughterhouses at night, working in factories, and doing other dangerous, prohibited occupations. Adolescents are twice as likely as adults to be seriously injured at work, which is why the Child Labor Act and federal law provide specific guidelines regarding what activities children may perform at work. So this amendment would help make sure that that information is transmitted to these employees, and then the coordinator in this bill would make proper and appropriate referrals if there is found to be a child or an unaccompanied minor actually in one of these workplaces. So I would ask for a yes vote on this amendment.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? All right, seeing none, I would urge all our members to oppose this amendment. Jonathan, please take the roll.
Dawkins,
No.
Boyd, Brennan, Deloso, Donahue, Gerald,
No by designation.
Green, Haddock, McNeil, O'Mara, Pisitano, Rozzi,
No by designation.
Scott,
No by designation.
Young,
No by designation.
McKenzie,
Yes.
Cooper, Diorsi,
Yes by designation.
Ecker,
Yes by designation.
Flood,
Yes by designation.
Gleim,
Yes.
Ham,
Yes by designation.
Jones,
Yes by designation.
Kiefer, Rowe,
Yes.
Stambaugh.
Yes.
The amendment fails.
Thank you. Minority Chairman McKenzie will also be offering amendment A04153. Andrew, please explain the amendment.
Thank you. Amendment A04153 by Chairman McKenzie requires employers to use the E-Verify system and provides for penalties.
Thank you. Representative Stambaugh will be making a motion to bring up amendment A04153, second by Representative Cooper. Any comments? I now turn to the Minority Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this amendment would require the use of E-Verify and provide penalties for employers who do not follow the use of that system. We have found this to be a useful tool in other industries. It's why we expanded with bipartisan support the use of E-Verify as a mandatory tool in the construction industry to protect American jobs, protect American wages, and also stop the employment of illegal immigrants in that industry. We think that this is another industry that has had a documented history and problems of using illegal and undocumented labor. I think a lot of the union facilities already in this industry already use E-Verify, and so we know that this is something that we should be expanding and including here, making it mandatory, would protect workers, employers, and our Commonwealth by ensuring that those individuals who are legally allowed to work in the industry are the ones that are actually getting those jobs. So I would encourage a yes vote. Again, if we want to protect American workers and American wages, this is a great way to do it. And again, it's already in use in a lot of the union facilities in this industry. So I'd encourage a yes vote.
Thank you. Are there other members wanting to be recognized? I would just urge members, as the minority chairman already mentioned, this is already in statute, is already happening in terms of the E-Verify. So I would ask all our members to oppose this particular amendment. Thank you. Jonathan, you can call the roll.
Dawkins,
No.
Boyd, Brennan, Deloso, Donahue, Jarrell,
No by designation.
Green, Haddock, McNeil, O'Mara, Piscitano, Rossi,
No by designation.
Scott,
No by
No.
designation. Oh, it's-
Young, McKenzie,
Yes.
Cooper, Diorsi,
Yes by designation.
Ecker,
Yes by designation.
Flood,
Yes by designation.
Gleim,
Yes.
Ham,
Yes by designation.
Jones,
Yes by designation.
Kiefer, Rowe, Danball.
Yes.
The amendment fails.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the bill? I now recognize the minority chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll go first. We do have a number of other members which would like to speak as well. But the legislation that is before us today, I know there have been discussions and legislation that was introduced on this topic in previous sessions, but this was introduced on Thursday. Really very short notice for such a substantial and far-reaching piece of legislation that would impact an industry by requiring employee training and orientation, certain time off in instances, establishing health and safety committees, establishing requirements for infectious disease protocols, establishing penalties. The actual department, while supportive of this legislation, does not have funding appropriated to actually do all of these things. And the fact that we just voted down as a committee, I obviously voted in support of amendments that would actually protect children and protect American workers is appalling. That is absolutely appalling. If this is about safety, where is the safety for all workers? Where are the protections for American workers? They're not in this bill. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed that you push out something like this and you don't protect American workers and American wages. So for all of those reasons, it's a no. We have an industry that is rife with problems. It is rife with safety violations. We have had problems in the past where we heard from the prime sponsor about all of the dangerous circumstances. There are unions in those workplaces that should be providing more protections for their employees. We see that time and time again, and that's why this industry is leading the push in automation. There are documented cases now where you see these horrendous situations and conditions that these employees are working under. They're automating that industry, taking the jobs away totally. And what we should instead be doing is finding a way to actually protect the workers that are in those situations. We should be doing that collaboratively. There's a lot of opposition to this bill. Again, it was rushed out on Thursday without proper stakeholder input, in my opinion. And if we actually want to do something to help to protect the workers in this industry, we should be coming together, finding solutions to protect them. I think it's a great cause. I just think that this solution is not going to get the support that we need, not going to get the buy-in that we need to actually end up protecting workers at the end of the day. We see that time and time again on this committee. Over the past year and a half, we have had bills jammed out of this committee along partisan lines, and all of them sit there dead. Not a single piece of legislation that has been intended to help the American workers has actually passed and been signed into law this session. That is a shame. That is a shame. We only have a limited amount of time as representatives here where we get to help the people of Pennsylvania. We're all replaceable. We're all interchangeable. There are going to be people that come along after us into these jobs. When we are here, we have an opportunity to actually protect people, to actually come together in a bipartisan fashion and make positive changes. If all you want to do is make policy statements and jam things out along partisan lines and do it in a really quick fashion, we're not actually going to be able to implement those changes. And so for those reasons, I would ask for a no vote on this legislation. I know there are lots of other members that want to talk about it as well. They're going to have other things to say, but I think it is a shame that we are letting down the American worker time and time again in this committee, which is intended to be there to help them. So I would ask for a no vote.
Thank you. Representative Gleim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who weren't legislators during the pandemic, I just want to remind everybody that we needed to actually deregulate in about every single committee in order to meet the needs of the citizens during that time. Yet here we are over-regulating during emergencies, making it more difficult to get food onto the shelves. Farmers will be greatly impacted by these regulations. The prime sponsor states, and I quote, "There is not a single law on the books that specifically protects workers in this dangerous industry. This statement is disingenuous, inaccurate, and misleading. All private sector workers are covered by OSHA, which provides meatpacking specific standards, and there is also oversight provided by the USDA. This bill may be preempted by OSHA and other federal laws, and there is a good chance this will lead to litigation. It is concerning to set different safety standards and laws for different safety-sensitive industries." And I'd like to further just comment and ask a question. Are the provisions of this bill permissible under federal law?
That would be a yes.
The application of the bill is very broad. There is a lot of confusion. Some stakeholders have suggested that this could apply to many grocery stores, while others have suggested that they are exempt. Regulations on food producers will cost money, and that cost will be passed along to consumers who are already struggling with grocery costs that have been impacted by Joe Biden's inflation. The bill imposes major responsibilities on the Department of Labor and Industry, which will represent a cost to taxpayers in the state budget. Do you have a cost for this bill? Do you have any idea how much it'll cost?
As a de minimis cost.
Okay, the last comment I would like to make actually on this bill has to do with the union exemption under the bill. Section 12 of the bill provides that a collective bargaining agreement can waive any portion of this act. So this effectively says that a collective bargaining agreement can opt out of all the provisions of this act as long as it's mutually agreed upon. This rule is completely unfair and is clearly designed to pander to union groups that may be negatively impacted by the contents of this bill. And in fact, it is the UFCW, the United Food Commercial Workers, who are pushing this bill. And Mr. Chairman, I brought with me a magazine. It's called the Farm Quarterly from 1961. I have it in front of me right here. As a farmer myself who grows beef, I am really concerned about this bill. And in the article about the unionization of farmers, it says, this is 1961, and the United Cannery, Agricultural, Packing, and Allied Workers of America was organized as a branch of the CIO. This union's approach was to organize the canneries and the packing sheds as a first step. There, they would be in a strategic position to refuse to process a grower's crops if he fought the organizing of his field workers. And I believe, Mr. Chairman, that this is the true intent of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for the prime sponsor about the bill here. Just some inconsistencies in the language I'm trying to wrap my head around. So if we're looking at Section 10A2, it provides for a $500 a day penalty for failure to adopt an infectious disease exposure prevention plan. But then it also states that there is the penalties are not to exceed $100,000 for failure to comply with an adopted infectious disease exposure prevention plan in the same section. So are we talking about two different fines here, or are we simply saying that once the employer is fined $100,000, all fines and enforcement mechanisms are moot?
Representative, what page and line number are you looking at?
So we're looking at page 15 and 16, Section 10A. Bottom of page 15, employer failure to comply, specifically Section 2.
Not a problem. I'll have Ryan answer that question.
Sure. So in that section, I believe the difference between the two is that if an employer fails to adopt a plan, the fine is $500 per day. If they do not comply with the plan that they have already adopted, then the penalty cannot exceed $100,000 for failure to comply with that plan.
So we are talking about two separate fines then, in the same, listed in the same section as one fine, but it is two separate fines.
I think he read that as it's one fine, but it has a cap.
So under the cap then, there's a $100,000 cap, so an employer could be fined up to $100,000 and then never, he could continue to not adopt the infectious disease exposure plan because he's already maxed out $100,000.
I don't believe that's correct.
But we can get clarity just to make sure.
So would there be language in here that would then say something that, $100,000 annually or something to that effect? Because the way it currently reads, I'm not sure, there might be some large employers out there that might say, hey, sure, we'll pay the $100,000 and then just never comply because all this bill says is it's a cap on it that you can never bypass.
Yes, so something we can look into.
Okay. Second question. So Section 13 on page 17 specifically states that any and all regulations are abrogated if they conflict with this act. What sort of specific regulations would that be? What are we referring to here?
Yeah, there's no specific that's listed here. Any could be affected by it.
So we don't know any specific regulations that that Section 13 is addressing.
Yeah, it's just the standard language of the bill.
Okay. And one more question. So on Section 4, page 5, the bill's requiring for 7 days of sick leave for full-time employees, 5 days of sick leave to part-time employees. But then if you look over in Section 8, it requires 80 additional hours of unpaid sick leave to employees during a health emergency. Employers already provide paid sick leave to employees who are exempt from this requirement. I guess my question is, a lot of companies provide sick leave and vacation time simply as their paid time off. So when you're blending days and hours, is there a reason that we didn't just do days or just do hours? And how is the inconsistency in those time variables going to impact existing companies' PTO policies? And are they going to have to adjust those significantly to comply?
Well, they really just apply to those who are infected. That's why you have that that range.
So companies that just have a paid time off policy as opposed to a sick leave versus health emergency leave, whatever, they are going to have to adjust their PTO policies to then comply.
Well, not so much that. It's just the fact that this is going to be for anyone who's been affected by an infectious disease in line of their work. So I don't want you to view this as the standard sick leave that's permissible in contracts across different different fields. This is really just for folks who have been impacted or infected by a disease on a job.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one more question.
Sure.
In the conversations with the stakeholder groups, what did they estimate would be the cost of implementation for them?
De minimis
Who do we get those comments from?
from the industry,
Which industry?
the food industry.
Is there somebody specific we can follow up to get those numbers from?
We will get that information to you.
Okay. Because I think it's easy to say, and on the bill, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm finished.
on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's easy to reference de minimis costs, but in reality, all costs are passed on to the consumer at the end of the day. And with the inflation rate still around 3.5% since 2000, cost of food has gone up almost 25%. It's getting harder and harder to keep food on the table. It's getting harder and harder to keep food on the shelves due to supply chain shortages, workforce issues. And I think we are passing along more costs to consumers. We are costing consumers more. They're struggling to make ends meet as it is. We're looking at issues with people being able to afford everything from fuel to their electric bills, and now we're going to make it harder for them to afford the food they need to keep their families and their children from going hungry. So I think we need a much clearer picture of what this is going to cost, because what those costs end up being to the employer will inevitably be passed along to the consumer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Representative Kiefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Many of my questions have been answered. I certainly understand, given post-COVID, all the issues we had with many of these processing facilities. And the issue I continued to find during COVID was that there was a lack of compliance with COVID. So they were not keeping safe distancing standard on their lines, much less during COVID. And then they weren't educating any of their employees as they were coming in contact with the disease. But my concern is that I have heard from some grocery retailers who have great issues with this bill, and I went through the language the best I could in a short amount of time to find where grocery stores are exempted, because I have grocery stores that actually do, pack meat, and they make their own products and package them in-house, and I don't see any place in this language where they're exempted. Can you tell me where that might be?
Yes. Ryan, can you explain?
Sure. So the definition of employer is all-encompassing. So in order to be covered, you have to satisfy both 1 and 2.
What page are you on?
That is page 2 in the definition of employer. Under 2, under that definition, the business is registered as a food facility under Public Health and Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002. That is a federal law. In that federal law, which any business, in order to be covered by this bill, has to be registered as a food facility under that law. And under that law, grocery stores are explicitly exempt in the regulation.
Okay, but like you said, this is really an all-encompassing. They were not understanding it like that. Their legal counsel was not interpreting it that way. And the definition is really broad as far as an employer goes. I think this will have huge impacts. I mean, speaking to thousands of constituents over the past 2 months, right? It's groceries, it's putting food on the table, and I just don't see how this is going to decrease those costs. If anything, it's going to compound the extraordinary inflation we're already seeing with minimum gains, given the fact that a lot of this is duplicative of what we have in federal and state laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Haddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of talking here today about safety of Americans that this bill doesn't have, but it actually does have safety of the Pennsylvania workers in this industry. Some of these policies in this, and thank you, several comments from the other side of the aisle on how encompassing this bill is. Thank you, it is. It addresses many of the needs that you talked about today. When you have a safety committee where you have workers and management on a team together talking about issues that could affect the safety of the whole business, that can save money over the long run. And I have sat on those type of committees several times in several industries that I've worked for. It works well, and it makes that business run more efficiently because they're safer and they don't lose time to their employees on the issues. So the safety committee here, it's an outline. We're giving it to the businesses that don't already have one in place, that should already have one in place. The pandemic, it's very similar. If we ever go back to a pandemic or epidemic, there's a plan written in this bill that already discusses and puts a plan in place. It just has to be implemented. So again, public safety for our workers. So this bill helps with many of the issues. You talked about supply chains and not getting food on the table. Our grocery shelves, I heard, being empty. This bill helps fill those grocery shelves. There's still room. We can discuss any issues, and this is the first step of the process. But a lot of the concerns I've heard today, there wasn't much to back it up other than rhetoric.
Thank you. Representative Brennan.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot from the other side that's acknowledging just how bad the problem is, sort of postulating that somebody has to do something. But you know, frankly, when we had a serious problem, these industries weren't doing anything, and when we had a pandemic, they were cramming people together into areas where it was creating massive problems. So I was a workers' comp attorney during a lot of this process. I've represented a microcosm of people who were getting hurt. And this is one of the most difficult industries to work in. You have an incredible amount of physical activity that you're doing that breaks down your body. You're in heat. You're in all different kinds of conditions. You're around mold. You're around all these different types of risks. You have people driving around on forklifts that may or may not be trained. And, you know, we can't sit here and say, you know, let's do nothing. We've had the opportunity. These industries aren't doing it themselves, and we need to regulate this. That's exactly what this is about. So if you want to help an American worker, let's make sure they're not getting run over by forklifts at work. Let's make sure that they're not losing limbs. If you want to talk about costs of a product, let's make sure that we're not having these industries use these employees, break these employees, have these employees lose their limbs, and then be forced onto Medicaid and social services because we have an employer that won't protect them. So, you know, your opportunity to help American workers is right here. Your opportunity is to vote yes on this and to have protections for your employees.
Thank you. All right. Well, I just want to first start off by thanking the prime sponsor for introducing this important legislation. Workers and Pennsylvanians in the meat packing and food processing industries are essential to our economy and daily life. Due to the dangerous nature of this vital industry, we must work together to enhance the safety of our workers. Now, what I've always find amusing in this particular committee is when I hear the minority party talk about rushing a process to protect workers, and they had 12 years to do all these American things for workers. In that 12-year time, none of these bills that we have introduced in this new term has ever passed the threshold in that 12-year period. So we had more than enough time to vet out what we need to do to protect our workers and how we can be more American. I would dare to say this committee was probably anti-American for the last 12 years because it did nothing for the American worker. And that is a fact. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. You can check the records. We have done the work that workers have asked us and sent us here to do. What I find appalling is that we talk about the rising cost of food, but we won't talk about the rising cost of wages in this committee. We talk about what bills have not made it to the governor's desk, but you fail to realize they have passed the House and they're being held up by Republicans in the Senate. You need to place blame where it belongs because House Democrats have done the work that Republican House members have not. And we have to make sure there's a distinction in who's here protecting workers and who's here campaigning. It is a difference. We do not talk about the work, we do the work. And if you want to do the work and stand with workers finally, you have an opportunity. You all are agreeing that we have to do something to protect these workers. But the only excuse you came up with today is that the bill came out on a Thursday and today is Tuesday and you didn't have enough time to read the bill. Conveniently, you always have an excuse on why you're not supporting workers. It is long time for you all to start to pit up or shut up in this committee. Jonathan, call the roll.
Dawkins,
Yes.
Boyd, Brennan,
Yes.
Deloso, Donahue, Gerald,
Yes by designation.
Green, Haddock, McNeil, O'Mara, Piscitano,
Yes by designation.
Rozzi,
Yes by designation.
Scott, Young, McKenzie, Cooper, Diorsi, Ecker, Flood, Gleim,
No.
Ham, Jones, Kiefer, Rowe,
Nope.
Stanball.
No.
The bill passes.
Oh, excuse me. If there's no further business, well, we got another bill. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Hearing, where are we at here? I'm sorry. House Bill 2235 is reported from the House and Labor Industry Committee. If there's no further business, this meeting is now adjourned. So thank you.